everyone. My name is Vanessa Van Decker. I'm a mechatronics engineering student and a mechanical and outreach lead on R3.
And hi, everyone. My name is Suji, and I'm a biomedical sciences student and a media and outreach team member at R3.
Today, we have the great privilege to speak to Chelsea Taylor. Welcome, Chelsea. We really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you, and we're excited to ask you some questions.
So to start, Chelsea, please describe your role at the Canadian Space Agency and what a typical day looks like for you.
Cool. So my role at the Canadian Space Agency is I'm an operations engineer within the flight control group. So I only started that position in February, so I'm very much in a training role. But typically a day for me involves doing different training activities to learn how the robotic systems on the International Space Station work, specifically Canadarm and Dexter. And then on top of training, I'm also learning how to be an instructor. So they do a lot of training for different people in the robotics group, as well as astronauts and other people from the overall International Space Station program. So I'm revising instructional materials and learning how to teach classes as well.
I know you worked on some lunar rovers previously, and there was recently an announcement that Canada's planning to do its own lunar rover in the near future. What do you think about that?
I'm really excited for that. I can't wait to see how the rover turns out. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of years of development, but yeah, I'm really excited for there to be a Canadian rover. I think it's going to be awesome.
As a Mars rover design team, we're really excited about it too. So you sound like you have a real passion for robotics and space. What sparked that passion in the space industry?
I think what really sparked my interest in the space industry was just discovering that it exists. I mean, growing up, I think everyone thinks that space is cool. It's just one of those things you accept as fact. But I didn't really know that there were opportunities for me in the space sector until I got an internship at Magellan Aerospace in Winnipeg, which was working on the RadarSat Constellation mission. So I did one summer there just working on testing software, but it really opened my eyes because I got to work in a clean room, looking at satellites, seeing them and knowing that those satellites were going to go into space. And it was just something that had never occurred to me before because I really hadn't heard of the space industry until then. Even as an engineering student, I didn't really know it existed. So I'd say that's what kind of got me into space.
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, we've all had those dreams of one day, maybe going to space or just working in an agency in and of itself. So it's great that you had that passion and you were able to actually go for it with it and be where you are right now. So all your experiences thus far, what would you say is a motto or a favorite quote that's got you through all these difficult or even great times to get you where you are right now?
I'd say, I don't know if it's so much of a motto, but a question that I often ask myself to guide my choices is, what would I do if I was the protagonist, if this was a story? Yeah. One anecdote is that when I was in my final year of engineering, I found out that I'd gotten a position at the Canadian Space Agency, but I was actually really kind of nervous and afraid to go because I'd never lived outside of Winnipeg before. I didn't know anyone in Montreal. It really seemed like a big risk. And I also had a different offer to stay in Winnipeg at a different engineering job. And I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but when I asked myself that question, what would I do if I was the protagonist? I immediately understood, yeah, of course I would go to Montreal, work at the space agency. It's so cool. And I think sometimes framing it that way helps you, I guess, address your fears and worries in a way. Like if I was braver, like if I knew I was going to succeed, what would I do? And I think it really helps you pursue your goals, I would say.
I love that motto. As an avid reader myself, I think that that's a great way to picture it. So with that transition from Manitoba to Montreal and working at this amazing Canadian Space Agency, how did you handle that transition and what was it like for you?
I found it really tough actually to move from Winnipeg to Montreal because I have a ton of family and friends in Winnipeg. And yeah, going to Montreal where it was a new language, it was a city I'd never lived in before, it was a new job. just that transition and feeling a little bit isolated was really tough for me. And I think that's something that you don't often take into account in a professional journey, all of the personal things that come along with maybe moving to a new city or taking a new job. But what really helped is that I joined the professional engineering development program. So there were also a bunch of other new hires from different places around Canada who were also fairly new in their careers. And we formed a network and we all kind of supported each other and made friends. And my manager was also really supportive. So having that network of just colleagues who also care about you as a person is really excellent. And I would say that that was the main difficulty in my transition.
It's yeah, like you said, it's always difficult building that network, but once you have it, it's incredibly useful in any field or anything you want to pursue. Just because just knowing people to help you out is just incredibly useful. So that's great. So you did mention that you did an internship and even numerous co-op positions throughout school and your university career. So what did you learn from these positions that you actually still apply to your job today at this space agency?
I think one of the main things that I've taken from my internships is just an understanding of different industries as well as different work environments. Like one of my positions was doing research, summer research at the university in the biomedical industry. So from that, I kind of got an idea of what it would be like to be a grad student working in research in a small team. I also worked at a hydroelectric company, and that company had about 200 people, but the engineering team was maybe like 60 people that I worked in. So it was a lot smaller. So I got to understand not only what the power industry is like, but also what working in a company of that size would be like. And then also one thing that's interesting about working at Magellan, the space company, was that they're a subcontractor for the CSA. So on the CSA side, I oversee a lot of projects sometimes where I have to review the work of subcontractors. But having had just that 4-month experience, I do understand a little bit what it's like to be on the other side. And I think that's really valuable for when you're managing a project, kind of to know what it's like at all of the stages with all of the different partners.
It sounds like you have a wide breadth of experience and perspective that you draw on. And with all of those tools in your toolbox, can you describe a time when you had to use those skills and techniques to overcome a difficult challenge?
So one challenge that I struggled with for a couple weeks, I guess, or maybe even months a little bit, was I was working on integrating a sensor onto a Lunar Rover prototype, and it came with one sun sensor. So I would take the rover out into the Mars yard, which was just so cool because this was right when I started the CSA, and even though I know the CSA is cool, I didn't expect to be able to just drive a rover around kind of in the backyard of CSA. So that was awesome. But there was a problem with the sensor because sometimes it would spit out really good data. So you could get really good readings of the sun, which it would then translate into an approximation of which direction the rover is facing, which is obviously important for navigation. But sometimes the data from the sun sensor was garbage and the rover had no idea which way it was facing. And I had to troubleshoot why that was. So what I ended up doing was I went out and did a bunch of different trials of the rover where I drive it around at different times of day, in different lighting conditions, kind of in different orientations. And when I looked at the data, I eventually realized that it had to do with the angle of the sun from the horizon. If the sun was too low in the sky, the sun sensor didn't work at all, but only for certain angles on the sun sensor. So it would only work if kind of the rover was facing north or south, but not the other way. And eventually I realized after like plotting the data in different ways that the solution was just that you needed 2 sun sensors kind of 90 degrees offset, which is a long-winded way of saying I used data analysis to solve a problem that required kind of an insight into how the sensor worked. Yeah.
That's a great story because that happens to us all the time on the team. You plan for everything to work, but then you put it all together and it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. It doesn't do what you expect when you turn it on. So we go through that a lot, and it's nice to hear that you do that at the space agency as well. And, you know, just to keep like looking at it analytically and work through it to find a solution.
You know, it's great that you were actually able to work with the rover as soon as you got into the space agency, which is really, it's a really cool thing. And I feel like a lot of people would, you know, love to do that. So it's incredibly cool that you were able to do that. So we know that there is work being done to make STEAM and robotics more inclusive, but what do you think we can do to improve on that work even further?
I think there's a lot of different ways to help make STEAM more inclusive. But one way that I think would help a lot would be to just normalize diversity so that anyone entering the field, if they looked around and saw, I don't know, all sorts of diverse people, they wouldn't even blink an eye. It would just be totally normal to be, I mean, whoever you are, just wanting to do space. So whether you're kind of a kid looking up and seeing people working as engineers or scientists in the field, and you see yourself represented, or if you're a professional already in the field and you have a network of people just like you who you can talk to and network with, I think it's really important. So I just want kind of to normalize that sense of everyone belongs here.
Exactly. Because once we get to a position where we see diversity to that extent, it's future generations it'll almost seem normal. Because right now we are trying to improve on that, but in the future, hopefully, we get to a point where that's just the norm. That's just how it should be, and I guess that's what we're working towards right now.
Yeah, that's what we want for our team. And that's how the world is. Like if you looked at the world as a whole, it's incredibly diverse. So it's nice to see that those barriers are coming down and everywhere it's getting as diverse as the whole world is. We're working towards that. It's a large goal, but so to end off, one final question. I wanted to ask you what your parting advice would be to students who want to follow in your footsteps to work in robotics as an engineer or at the Canadian space industry, or even in the wider Canadian space sector.
I think my main parting advice for people who want to get involved in engineering or the entire space sector or really anything is just to get involved in student groups or in anything really, but try different things, meet new people. I know that from my experience as a student, being involved in different student groups, whether they were technical groups like IEEE or design teams, they were super valuable experiences because they allowed me to work on my technical skills and apply the knowledge I learned in my classes, but also to work on my soft skills, like how to run efficient meetings, how to work in a team with other students who may also be really stressed like you are. And on top of that, it helped me make friends, as well as people who are excellent colleagues and just contacts even now. So I'd say, yeah, try new things, get involved. Those would be my two main pieces of advice for students.
That's great. Thank you so much. So that does conclude our interview. Thank you so much, Chelsea, for speaking to us today. It's been a pleasure.
We really appreciate your generosity with your time and your advice.
Yeah, thanks for having me.